Lauren Carter adjusted her thin-rimmed glasses and pushed her cup of cold coffee away. It was long past dark outside her office window at Morgan Stanley, but she was still poring over the quarterly report. The monitor cast a bluish light on her face, highlighting the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, traces of smiles and long hours of working with numbers. Her phone vibrated, a message from Michael. "Running late at the office. Don't wait up for dinner." Lauren nodded mechanically. Lately, it had become an almost nightly ritual. She swiped her finger across the screen, opening her message history. 19 similar texts over the past month. At least her husband used to vary the wording. In the empty open space, the coffee machine clicked. Martha, the night cleaner, had begun her rounds. Her footsteps, muffled by the carpet, reminded Lauren that it was time to get ready. Closing the last spreadsheet, she reached for her Michael Kors bag, a gift from her husband last Christmas. Stepping out into the parking lot, Lauren shivered in the cool spring breeze. Her neighborhood greeted her with its usual silence. Her respectable neighbors had long since retired for the night. Only the windows of the house across the street were lit. The Andersons were celebrating their eldest daughter's engagement. The hallway greeted her with a hollow emptiness. Michael's shoes were missing from their usual place, as was his favorite bison leather briefcase. Lauren turned on the kitchen light and took a container of salad out of the refrigerator. She didn't feel like eating, but skipping dinner wasn't wise. She was watching her diet. Mechanically chewing the arugula leaves, she remembered their last real conversation with her husband. It was 2 weeks ago when she suggested spending the weekend at their country house, just the two of them, like in the old days. Michael had declined, citing urgent business without even looking up from his phone. The TV in the living room was quietly muttering the news. Lauren sat down in an armchair, mechanically stroking the armrest, a habit she had retained from childhood. Her gaze fell on the family photo on the mantelpiece, her and Michael in the Bahamas 5 years ago, tanned, smiling, dressed in white, a classic resort photo. Back then, he still looked at her as if she were the center of his universe. The sound of a car pulling up made her start. The clock showed 11:15. The key turned in the lock and Michael entered, loosening his tie as he walked. He smelled of expensive cologne, stronger than usual, as if he had added a new splash before coming home. "Hi, honey. Sorry I'm late. Difficult client," he said, walking past her without even glancing in her direction. He used to always kiss her on the cheek when he came home. It was a small thing, but it was the little things that added up to the big picture. Something had changed in their relationship. "I'll heat up dinner," she offered. "Don't bother. I had a snack at the office," came from the bedroom. Lauren remained seated in the armchair, mindlessly flipping through the channels. The sound of the dishwasher running came from the kitchen, and water was running in the bedroom. The familiar sounds of their life together now seemed somehow foreign. She caught herself trying to remember the last time she and Michael had just talked before bed. Not about work, bills, or plans for the weekend, but just like they used to. When had he stopped telling her about his day? When had she stopped sharing her thoughts with him? Turning off the TV, Lauren went up to the bedroom. Michael was already in bed, buried in his phone. They used to read before bed. She loved fantasy. He loved biographies of famous lawyers. Now their evenings were spent in silence, broken only by the sounds of notifications from his phone. The usual morning bustle reigned at the law firm Bradley, Thompson and Partners. Jessica Reynolds adjusted her white blouse and settled into her new workstation. The desk looked unusually empty for now, just a computer, an organizer, and a cup with pencils. On the neighboring desk towered a stack of folders with documents, behind which the top of Nancy's head, the senior partner's secretary, was barely visible. "Don't worry, you'll have a mountain like that soon," Nancy winked, noticing the newcomer's gaze. "By the way, you're lucky with your boss. Michael Carter is one of the most promising lawyers in the firm. Last year, he won a high-profile case against a pharmaceutical giant. Jessica nodded, showing interest. She had already managed to find out about her immediate superior. Michael Carter, a Yale graduate, specialized in corporate law. At 40, he was already one of the most successful lawyers in the city. By noon, her desk no longer looked so empty. Nancy showed her the filing system and how to use the local database. Jessica quickly got the hang of things. Her experience at 3 law firms had not been wasted. "Miss Reynolds, come in," came a voice from Carter's office. Jessica stood up, pulling down her tight skirt. Michael was sitting at a massive mahogany desk, studying some papers. Framed diplomas and photos with important clients hung on the wall behind him. Jessica didn't notice any family photos. "Have a seat," Michael said, pointing to the chair across from him. "How's the adjustment going?" "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Nancy has been very helpful in getting me settled in." "Excellent. We have several major projects in the works right now. Here are the documents for the Riverside development case. They need to be prepared for tomorrow's meeting." He handed her a heavy folder. "Of course, Mr. Carter. When do they need to be ready?" "By 9 in the morning. You may have to stay late today." Jessica bowed her head, hiding a smile. At her previous firm, she often stayed late sorting through documents. This had earned her a reputation as a diligent and dedicated employee. The day flew by. By 7 in the evening, the office was empty, with only a dim light still shining from Carter's office. Jessica knocked and entered with the finished documents. "Mr. Carter, I've finished the Riverside case." Michael looked up from his papers. His tie was slightly loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up. "Already? Impressive. Let's take a look." He gestured for her to sit down next to him. He smelled of expensive cologne. Jessica settled into the chair, a little closer than was necessary for work. "You're very attentive to detail," Michael remarked as he looked through the prepared documents. "Did you work on similar cases at your last firm?" "Yes, I have experience with large corporate clients." Jessica leaned forward, pointing to one of the items in the agreement. Their hands accidentally touched. "I'm sorry." She pulled her hand away, but not too quickly. "It's okay." Michael lingered on her hand a little longer than necessary. "You've done a great job. I think we'll work well together." It was already dark outside. A siren could be heard in the distance. Jessica gathered her documents, deliberately taking her time. "Are you going home now? Would you like me to call you a taxi?" "Thanks. I have my car," she smiled. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Carter." As she left the office, Jessica felt his gaze on her. Everything was going according to plan. At her last firm, it had taken her 3 months to get a promotion. Here, she planned to do it faster. She lingered in the parking lot to check her email. Carter's headlights illuminated the asphalt. He was also leaving for home. I wonder if his wife is waiting for him with dinner. Jessica opened her search engine and typed in Lauren Carter. It was time to find out more about her rival. In the conference room at Bradley, Thompson and Partners, a discussion about a new project was underway. Jessica sat slightly apart, taking notes in her notebook. Her presence at such meetings was no longer questioned. Over the past 2 months, she had become Michael Carter's indispensable assistant. "Let's take a break," Michael announced when the discussion reached an impasse. The partners headed for the coffee machine, exchanging jokes about a difficult client. Jessica gathered the documents scattered across the table, watching Michael talk to his colleagues out of the corner of her eye. Lately, he had been consulting her more and more on work issues and entrusting her with important tasks. Sometimes they stayed late at the office, sorting out complicated cases. On such evenings, Michael would order food from a Chinese restaurant across the street, and they would discuss strategies for working with clients. "Jessica, stay for a minute," Michael called as everyone left. "I have a delicate matter to discuss." He took a folder of documents out of his briefcase. "This is a personal matter. The client has requested maximum confidentiality. I would like you to work on this separately from your regular work. That was how their personal projects began, cases that did not go through the firm's official system. At first, they were small tasks, organizing a meeting, preparing documents. Then clients appeared who were willing to pay for expedited handling of their cases. That evening, they had dinner outside the office for the first time. A small restaurant 2 blocks from work, which served excellent steaks, became their unofficial meeting place to discuss special clients. Michael talked about the difficulties of working in a large firm, the politics of the partners, and how important it was to have a reliable assistant. "You know, Jessica, I'm glad I can count on you," he said, twirling his wine glass. "That's rare in our line of work." She smiled, noticing that he had called her by her first name outside the office for the first time. The conversation flowed smoothly from work topics to discussions of favorite movies and books. It turned out that they had both read adventure novels as children. "It's late," Michael realized, glancing at his watch. "Let me call you a taxi." "Thanks, but I live nearby. I can walk." "Then I'll walk you home. It's not safe to walk alone at this time of night." They walked through the evening streets, discussing the latest case. Near her house, Michael suddenly fell silent, as if he were about to say something. Jessica waited, feeling the tension growing. "See you tomorrow," he finally said, and quickly walked away. The next day at the office, everything was as usual. Documents, phone calls, meetings. Only now their glances sometimes met through the glass partition of the office, and the air between them seemed to sparkle with unspoken words. Personal projects multiplied. Jessica started a separate folder for special clients. Michael increasingly asked for her help with unusual tasks. They spent more and more time together, and the boundaries between work and personal communication gradually blurred. That evening, they stayed late at the office again. It was raining outside, and Michael offered to drive her home. Soft music played in the car, and folders with documents lay on the back seat. "Want to stop for a coffee?" he suggested as they approached her house. "We can discuss tomorrow's meeting." They both knew there was no meeting planned for tomorrow. The small coffee shop on the corner was almost empty. They sat by the window, watching the rain, talking about everything and nothing in particular. When Michael covered her hand with his, it felt so natural, as if they had done it many times before. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said quietly. "I know," Jessica replied, not removing her hand. The rain intensified, drumming on the window. They finished their cold coffee in silence, realizing that they had crossed some invisible line and there was no turning back. Now, in the office, every conversation, every casual gesture had a double meaning. They tried to act normal, but something had changed. Jessica noticed how Michael would sneak glances at her during meetings and linger at her desk longer than necessary. Personal projects demanded more and more time and attention. Now they often worked late in his office, discussing the details of special cases. Sometimes their fingers touched over documents, and they both pretended nothing had happened. Gradually, they developed their own little rituals: morning coffee that she brought to his office, joint lunches under the pretext of discussing business, long evening conversations after work. They didn't talk about what was going on between them, but they both felt that it had long since ceased to be just work. On Friday evening, the office emptied earlier than usual. There was a company party planned to celebrate winning the Sutton Industries case. Jessica stayed behind to finish some paperwork. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew Michael would be staying late too. Lately, it had become a habit, spending evenings together in the empty office, where they didn't have to pretend in front of their colleagues. Michael came out of his office and stopped at her desk. "Want to join the others at the bar?" Jessica shook her head without looking up from her monitor. "I have to finish the Morrison report." "That can wait until Monday," he said, sitting down on the edge of her desk. Such informality would have been unthinkable during the day when employees were bustling around. I'd rather finish my work first, she finally looked at him. In the empty office, lit only by a desk lamp, his face seemed different, without his usual mask of a successful lawyer. You know, I rented an apartment not far from here, he said suddenly, for special projects. It's more comfortable than the office. Jessica said nothing, continuing to look at him. They both understood what he meant. We can work there. No one will disturb us. The apartment turned out to be a small studio with minimal furnishings, a sofa, a desk, and a couple of chairs, a typical place for business meetings. Michael took a bottle of wine from the bar. A glass? He handed her a glass and their fingers touched. They sat on the sofa discussing the latest case, but they both knew that work had nothing to do with it. When Michael leaned in to kiss her, it felt so natural, as if they had done it 100 times before. On Monday morning, they met at the office as if nothing had happened. Jessica brought him coffee and they discussed their meeting schedule. But something had changed. The way he looked at her during meetings, the way she adjusted her hair as she walked past his office. The apartment became their secret refuge. There, they could be themselves, not playing the roles of boss and secretary. Michael told her about his life, how his marriage had burned out, how tired he was of the routine. Jessica listened without interrupting and thought about her plans. At the office, they remained strictly professional. Michael began to schedule meetings with her more often and assign her important projects. No one could accuse him of favoritism. She really was a good specialist. Their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes they just sat in the apartment, ordered food, and talked about everything under the sun. Sometimes they worked. Michael actually brought some documents there. This helped maintain the illusion that everything that was happening between them was somehow related to work. Nancy began to look at them suspiciously. She had worked at the firm too long not to notice such things, but Jessica was careful. No personal conversations on the phone, no ambiguous notes, only work, only professional relations. Michael came home late more and more often. He told his wife about urgent matters, important clients, corporate meetings. Some of it was true. He did have a lot of work, but now he had a reason to stay late at the office. She never asked him about his wife. It was their unspoken rule not to talk about his family. Jessica knew he wouldn't leave home. Too much was at stake, too complicated relationships with partners at the firm who valued stability. That suited her. She wasn't looking for a long-term relationship either. Everything went on as usual at the office. Meetings, phone calls, documents. Now they had their own secret language, glances, accidental touches, unspoken phrases. They had learned to communicate without saying a word. Their colleagues saw only what they were supposed to see, a successful lawyer and his competent assistant. And in the evenings, there was an apartment where they could take off their masks and just be together, where they didn't have to pretend or watch every word, where only their little world existed, built on unspoken words and secret meetings. After 2 months of working on the new project, Lauren got used to spending her evenings alone. Once again, ordering dinner for one, she mindlessly flipped through her bank statements, a useful habit for a financial analyst to keep track of family expenses. Lately, Michael had been using cash more often, although he used to prefer his corporate card. It was easier to report business dinners to the tax authorities that way. Michael was coming home later and later. He had become more economical with details. He used to talk eagerly about difficult clients and interesting cases, but now he got by with general phrases. His phone was increasingly on silent mode, even though he could be called at any time for work. On the weekend, for the first time in their marriage, Michael refused to go to her parents' barbecue, citing urgent work. That evening, Lauren ran into his colleague Steve at the supermarket. He was genuinely surprised to hear about the urgent matter. As far as he knew, all important meetings had been postponed until the following week. At home, Lauren turned on her laptop as usual to check her email. She accidentally noticed that Michael had forgotten to log out of his account. She had never read his correspondence. Trust was the foundation of their relationship. But now, her finger slid across the touchpad on its own. Nothing special: work emails, correspondence with colleagues, newsletters. Michael had always been meticulous about security, deleting unnecessary messages immediately. In the Sent folder, she found several emails from someone named Jessica Reynolds discussing some confidential projects. The name seemed vaguely familiar. She thought she had seen it in the company's latest annual report. A couple of days later, Lauren stopped by her husband's office to bring him some documents he had forgotten at home. Michael looked surprised and even slightly annoyed by her appearance. The young woman at the desk in his office, apparently the same Jessica, glanced at Lauren and immediately buried her face in the monitor. That evening, while looking through their shared calendar, Lauren noticed that her husband's business dinners were now taking place at different restaurants, not the ones where he usually took clients. Once, she even checked by calling the restaurant to confirm a reservation for a corporate event. The manager apologized profusely, saying that they had a private banquet that evening and were not accepting any guests. Michael began to use taxis more often instead of his company car with a driver. The receipts appeared regularly in the shared expense folder, but for some reason, the addresses of the trips did not match the meeting locations listed in his schedule. The firm began work on a new major project. Lauren found out about it by accident when she came across a note in a business newspaper. Michael usually told her about important matters, as she could give useful advice on financial matters. Now, he remained silent or changed the subject. He set a new password on his phone. To protect client information, he explained. They used to know each other's passwords. It made it easier to coordinate meetings and trips. At dinner, Michael was increasingly glued to his phone. Sometimes Lauren noticed him smiling furtively as he read messages. She learned to tell who they were from. At such moments, he became distracted and responded inappropriately. On Friday evening, they were invited to a charity event. Michael canceled at the last minute, an important meeting with a client. Lauren went alone. In the restroom, she overheard two women discussing Carter's new secretary, how talented she was and how quickly she had fit into the team. And her dresses are so stylish, especially the blue one she wore at Mason House last week. Lauren remembered that evening. Michael had been held up at the office for an urgent meeting. Mason House was on the other side of town. At home, she opened her laptop and typed Jessica Reynolds, lawyer, into the search engine. A few photos from corporate events, an article about winning a small case. Nothing special, the usual career of an ambitious young woman. Michael's phone vibrated quietly, a notification from his calendar. Lauren glanced at the entry, Meeting with J, Riverside Project. The address was listed below, a neighborhood they had never been to for work. Jessica turned on the new laptop she had bought specifically for special projects. The apartment Michael had rented was gradually filling up with details. Now it had not only the bare minimum of furniture, but also a workspace with all the necessary equipment. Opening the Riverside folder, she carefully reviewed the documents. A large development project, many interested parties, complex approvals from City Hall. The perfect opportunity for a first step. Michael was planning to come in later. He had an important meeting with partners from the firm. Jessica had time to prepare. She opened the second file, a list of contacts in the city administration that she had managed to get from a friend from her previous job. Picking up the phone, she dialed the number. Mr. Rodriguez? Good afternoon. This is Jessica Reynolds from Bradley Thompson and Partners. I'm calling about the Riverside project. We may have an interesting proposal for you. The conversation took less than 10 minutes. Rodriguez turned out to be quick on the uptake. As soon as she hinted at the possibility of speeding up the process for an additional fee, he immediately got the idea. They agreed to meet at a small cafe outside the city. Jessica took a new phone out of her bag. Another precaution. Only special clients knew this number. She was just finishing entering Rodriguez's contact information when the key turned in the lock. "I brought dinner," Michael said, placing bags from their favorite Chinese restaurant on the table. He looked tired after a long day. "How's the paperwork going?" "Almost done," she said, kissing him. "I found some interesting leads on the approvals. I think we can speed up the process considerably." Over dinner, she told him about the main points, leaving out her conversation with Rodriguez. Michael listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She loved these evenings when they could discuss work issues calmly without fear of prying ears. "By the way, I've arranged a meeting with a representative of the city administration," she mentioned casually. "I think he can help with the permits." Michael frowned. "Isn't that too risky?" "Trust me," she smiled. "I have experience dealing with these kinds of issues." He didn't ask any further questions. Over the past few months, he had grown accustomed to relying on her judgment in delicate situations. She knew how to solve problems without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. The next day, Jessica met with Rodriguez. The conversation was constructive. He named his price for consulting, and she set a timeline. Both understood that this was the beginning of a long-term collaboration. At the office, she was especially careful. No personal calls, no suspicious meetings. All contact with new clients was made through a separate phone, and all documents were stored on a separate laptop in her apartment. That evening, lying in bed, Michael asked, "Are you sure we're not rushing this project too much?" She ran her hand over his chest. "Honey, you need this victory. Your partners need to see that you are capable of solving complex problems using unconventional methods." He sighed. "I just don't want to risk what we have." "We'll be careful," she kissed him. "Besides, it will bring in good money." Jessica didn't specify that most of the money would go to a separate account rather than the company's coffers. Michael didn't need to know all the details yet. First, they had to prove that the scheme worked. The following week, she arranged 2 more meetings, with the head of the approvals department and a representative of the fire department. Each named their price, and she promised them quick payment. Meanwhile, everything was going as usual at the office. During the day, she was a model secretary, efficient, diligent, and always ready to help. In the evening, she transformed into an experienced negotiator, skillfully building a network of useful contacts. Michael didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He saw the results. The approval process was speeding up and the clients were satisfied. And if some payments didn't go through the official accounting department, well, anything can happen in their business. Jessica carefully documented every meeting and every payment. She had learned this at her previous job. Always have proof in case something goes wrong. Compromising information is the best insurance in their business. On Friday evening, she and Michael sat in the apartment discussing the week's successes. The Riverside project was progressing even faster than planned. The firm's partners were impressed with the results. "You were right," Michael admitted, pouring wine. "Your methods really work." Jessica smiled, looking at him over her glass. She knew this was just the beginning. She had big plans for this firm and for this man. Her second phone vibrated quietly in her purse, a message from a new client. Another project, another opportunity to make money. But she would tell Michael about that later. Now was the time for other conversations. Lauren never thought she'd be searching the internet for information about GPS trackers. The tiny device she'd bought at a spy shop lay on the table in front of her. The salesman had assured her that it could be attached to the underside of a car and would work in any weather for at least a month. Early in the morning, while Michael was still asleep after a long meeting with clients the day before, Lauren quietly got dressed and went down to the underground parking lot of their house. She crouched down next to the car. The tracker attached itself to the underside of the car almost silently. In the evening, she opened the tracking app for the first time. A red dot on the map showed that Michael's car was parked at his office. It gradually became a ritual to check the car's location every hour. Most of the time, everything matched what her husband had said: the office, court, meetings with clients at respectable restaurants. But sometimes the red dot would freeze in unfamiliar places. An old industrial area that had been converted into trendy lofts, quiet streets next to a park, lined with expensive apartment buildings. These trips were never marked on his work calendar. One day, she followed the dot to a small residential complex half an hour's drive from the center. Michael parked there at exactly 7 p.m., the time when he was supposed to be at an important meeting with business partners. The car stayed there for more than 3 hours. Lauren wrote down every address, every discrepancy between the routes and the official plans. She compared the data with bank statements, looking for patterns. Gradually, she accumulated an impressive archive of evidence that her husband was leading a secret life she knew nothing about. A map appeared in her diary with marks indicating the places Michael regularly visited. Several addresses were repeated particularly often. One of them, the residential complex, began to appear on his route almost every evening. Lauren now spent her free time studying the area. She found out that the complex consisted of small studio apartments that were often rented out. It was the perfect place for secret meetings, respectable enough not to arouse suspicion, but not so expensive as to attract unnecessary attention. The red dot on her phone screen became an obsession. Every movement, every stop raised questions. When Michael said he was late for work, she immediately checked the location of his car. Sometimes the coordinates matched his office, but more and more often the car was in completely different places. After 2 weeks of observation, Lauren noticed a clear pattern. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Michael regularly arrived at the same residential complex around 7 p.m. and stayed there for several hours. On those days, he always said he had important meetings with clients or urgent work to do. One day, she drove past the complex at the time when Michael usually parked there. His car was in the guest parking lot, and next to it was the dark blue Lexus she had seen in his office parking lot. It was Jessica Reynolds' car. Lauren didn't stop or try to find out the exact apartment number. This coincidence was enough to convince her that her suspicions were not unfounded. But suspicions alone were not enough. She needed irrefutable proof. She continued to follow her husband's movements, now with a different goal in mind. Not to catch him cheating, but to find out what else he was hiding. He spent too much time in places that had nothing to do with his official work at the law firm. Too often, his routes took him to areas where the city administration and various supervisory bodies had their offices. One evening, the red dot lingered for a long time near a small restaurant on the outskirts of the city. Lauren remembered the place. They had stopped there for lunch once. It was an unremarkable establishment, a strange choice for a business meeting. She made a note of it on her list of suspicious addresses. The tracker's battery was due to run out in a week. Lauren had already gathered enough information to realize that the problem was much more serious than just a fling on the side. It was time to move on to the next stage of the investigation. Michael sat at the kitchen table, mechanically stirring his long, cold coffee. In front of him were printouts of his car's route, regular visits to a residential complex where he spent several hours several times a week. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. an apartment in Oakwood Gardens, and Jessica parks her car nearby, Lauren said calmly, almost without emotion. There's no need to deny anything, Michael. Just tell me the truth, at least now. He stared into his cup as if trying to find the answers there. Then he slowly raised his eyes. Yes, I'm having an affair with Jessica. Lauren nodded. She had been waiting for this confession for months, but it didn't make it any easier. How long? Almost 6 months. Outside, the neighbor's lawnmower was buzzing. A typical Saturday morning in a respectable suburb. Everything was as usual except that their life had just been split into before and after. "I want a divorce," Lauren said simply and firmly. "No drama, no public spectacle, just a divorce." "Lauren, no, Michael. No explanations, no excuses. We both know this marriage is over. I didn't want it to end like this." "What did you want? For me to never find out? For you to continue living a double life?" Michael was silent. What could he say? "I've already contacted a lawyer. She'll have all the papers ready by next week. I'll keep the house. It was bought with my money before we got married. We'll split the joint accounts evenly." "What about my practice?" "You can keep it. I don't want to share in the firm. Just sign the papers when the time comes." He nodded, still staring into his coffee cup. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow you'll pack your things and leave." "Where?" "I'm sure Jessica has a place for you," Lauren said, her voice tinged with bitterness for the first time. "After all, you're used to living together in that apartment." Michael grimaced. "You do realize that this will ruin my reputation at the firm? An affair with a secretary. Divorce. You should have thought about that before. 6 months ago, for example." She rose from the table. "And yes, Michael, I'm not going to tell anyone about Jessica. Your reputation will remain untarnished. You can tell everyone that we just grew apart. It happens." "Thank you," he said, looking her in the eyes for the first time. "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I just don't want our divorce to become dirty gossip in the office." That evening, Lauren sat in her office reviewing the documents her lawyer had sent her. It was all surprisingly simple. After 15 years of marriage, their lives were separated by a few strokes of a pen in the right boxes. There was no sound coming from the guest bedroom. Tomorrow Michael would be gone, and the house would be empty. However, it had been empty for a long time. She just didn't want to notice it. In the morning, she heard the front door slam. Michael had left without saying goodbye. His house key and wedding ring were left on the kitchen table. Lauren made herself some coffee and sat down at her laptop. No one had canceled the workday. Divorce was divorce, but the quarterly report wouldn't write itself. Over the past month, Jessica had stopped hiding her new diamond ring from her colleagues. Every morning in the office coffee area, she excitedly discussed her wedding plans with the other secretaries. Her ringing voice carried throughout the floor as she talked about the flowers she had chosen and how difficult it was to find the perfect venue for the ceremony. Lauren had no idea how to organize events, she confided to Nancy. Her wedding to Michael was so boring, just dinner at a restaurant. "I want a real celebration." Nancy looked away awkwardly. She remembered that wedding, elegant and refined just like Lauren herself. But she kept quiet. Jessica was now engaged to a partner at the firm, and no one wanted to argue with her. "You know, she didn't even know how to dress." Jessica lowered her voice to a loud whisper. "Always those boring suits and flat shoes. No wonder, Michael." She didn't finish, but looked meaningfully at the women gathered around her. They nodded in agreement. No one wanted to ruin their relationship with the boss's future wife. During the lunch break, the conversation continued. Jessica described in detail the wedding dress she had ordered from a famous salon. "It will be special, not like a standard dress from a store like some people have." She smiled meaningfully again. Intern Emily, who didn't know the background, innocently asked, "What kind of dress did Mr. Carter's first wife wear?" "A beige suit from a department store," Jessica laughed. She had no idea what the wife of a successful lawyer should look like. All she knew how to do was fiddle with numbers. A few days later, these conversations reached Lauren. Her former tennis club colleague accidentally overheard Jessica discussing her in the ladies' room of a trendy restaurant. "You won't believe what she's saying about me." Her friend recounted the details over a glass of wine. "How can you stand it?" Lauren shrugged. "What does it matter? Let her say what she wants." But that evening, When she was alone, she took out an old photo album. Her wedding to Michael had been exactly as they wanted it, intimate and elegant. And the dress, well, she had always preferred classic, ostentatious luxury. The following week, Jessica threw a grand engagement party at an expensive restaurant. All the company employees were invited. She shone in an open dress, showing off her ring to every guest. "Michael is finally happy," she announced loudly at the end of the evening. "He deserves a real woman by his side, not a blue stocking with a calculator." At that moment, Lauren was reviewing the materials she had collected over the past few months about financial fraud at the firm. She hadn't yet decided what to do with them. Revenge had never been her style. But now, listening to yet another retelling of Jessica's antics, she wondered for the first time if some people deserved to get what they deserved. Opening her laptop, she began to make a plan. After all, she was really good with numbers. And those numbers would tell the wedding guests a very different story about the beautiful bride. The main hall of the Regency Plaza Hotel was bustling with pre-wedding excitement. Jessica, in a luxurious white dress by a famous designer, was receiving congratulations from guests. The wedding planner was rushing around with printouts, checking the last details while the florists were finishing decorating the hall. "Look at my dress," Jessica twirled in front of a group of guests. "It cost as much as a new Mercedes, but Michael said only the best, not like some people who skimp on their own wedding." At that moment, Lauren was parking her car at the Bradley, Thompson and Partners building. Security guard George nodded to her in a friendly manner. She had been working there for 15 years and felt like one of the family. "Mrs. Carter." "I'm sorry, Miss Lauren," he corrected himself. "Aren't you at the wedding?" "I just need to pick up some documents," she smiled. "You know, I forgot to return a few folders when I was helping Michael with his tax returns." George nodded understandingly. He had always found her pleasant, unlike the new bride who treated him like he was invisible. The office was empty. All the employees had left for the ceremony. Only Martha, the elderly cleaning lady, was wiping the windows. "Miss Lauren, how nice of you to stop by." Martha put down the rag. "That girl has gotten out of hand. She was talking trash about you again yesterday." "It's okay, Martha. I need to check something on the surveillance system. Can you help me?" Martha had worked at the firm longer than anyone else. She knew every corner of the building and had access to all the rooms, including the server room where the camera recordings were stored. "Of course, dear. But hurry up. The technician is coming in an hour to check the equipment." Everything in Michael's office was just as it had been before. Even their wedding photo was still on the shelf. He must have forgotten to take it down. Lauren turned on the computer. She knew the password. Michael had never changed it, assuming his ex-wife wouldn't snoop around in his business. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Jessica continued to shine. She had gathered a group of young female employees around her. "Do you know why they really got divorced?" she whispered dramatically. She just couldn't give Michael what he needed. No children, no normal family life, just work and endless talk about numbers. In the office, Lauren quickly scanned through files, copying the necessary documents onto a flash drive. Surveillance camera footage from the hallways, bank statements, email correspondence, anything that might be useful. "Miss Lauren," Martha peeked into the office. "The technician is coming early. We need to wrap up." 5 more minutes." Lauren opened the last folder. What she was looking for was right there. Documents for the Riverside project and a list of special clients. The ceremony was about to begin at the hotel. Jessica adjusted her dress one last time in front of the mirror. "Perfect," she said, turning to her bridesmaids. "This is a real wedding, not some cheap party at a restaurant like some people have." Lauren was already pulling out of the parking lot when her phone rang. Nancy's number lit up. "You should know." Her secretary's voice sounded alarmed. "She's been bad-mouthing you all day. It's unbearable." Thanks, Nancy, but that's all about to change. In the banquet hall of the Regency Plaza Hotel, guests were taking their seats. Jessica, in a luxurious white dress, stood next to Michael, accepting congratulations. Her face was lit up with the triumphant smile of a winner. Lauren parked across the street from the hotel. Opening her laptop, she looked through the prepared files one last time. First on the mailing list was Robert Bradley, senior partner of the firm, a video recording of Jessica meeting with a city official late at night and handing him an envelope. Next were documents about secret deals and schemes to launder clients' money. The wedding march began to play in the hall. Jessica floated toward the altar, her head held high. Her crystal-encrusted veil sparkled in the light of the chandeliers. "The perfect couple," the guests whispered. "They're so right for each other." Phones buzzed simultaneously, dozens of messages with attached files. At first, no one paid any attention. Everyone was looking at the bride. But gradually, one guest after another began to sneak a peek at their email. Lauren could see through the window how the expressions on people's faces in the hall were changing. There was Robert Bradley, frowning as he looked at his phone. There was James Thompson, the firm's second partner, who had turned pale. An elderly judge in the front row slowly shook his head. Jessica was just finishing her vows when she noticed the strange commotion among the guests. Michael also sensed something was wrong. He stared intently at the faces of those sitting in the hall. "You may kiss the bride," said the priest. At that moment, Robert Bradley stood up and headed for the exit. Other partners from the firm followed him. Jessica smiled confusedly, not understanding what was happening. Michael was the first to grab his phone. His face froze when he opened the first file. Jessica quickly took her smartphone out of her bouquet and followed suit. There was a muffled hum in the hall as guests passed phones to each other, showing photos and documents. Some shook their heads, others whispered indignantly. "This is a lie!" Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. "Michael, tell them!" But Michael remained silent, feverishly flipping through the files. He recognized these documents. Many of them had passed through his hands. He just hadn't thought about where the extra money from clients came from before. A tax official, invited to the wedding as an old family friend, carefully studied the account statements. Two prosecutors whispered to each other, making notes on their phones. Jessica rushed between the guests, trying to explain, to justify herself, but people looked away. Her flawless dress now seemed like a ridiculous costume. Lauren started the car. Her work here was done. As she drove past the hotel, she saw the first police cars pulling up to the main entrance. One of the guests had apparently decided not to put off dealing with the matter. That evening, she was sitting at home with a glass of wine when Nancy called. "It was hell," said the secretary. "The police questioned everyone until late in the evening. Jessica was taken away. Michael tried to contact a lawyer, but no one is answering the phone. They're all afraid of tarnishing their reputation." "What about the wedding dress?" Lauren asked. "Did it really cost as much as a new Mercedes? What difference does it make now?" Nancy sighed. "She'll be wearing a completely different kind of clothing in prison." Chapter 12. An emergency meeting was underway in the conference room of the district attorney's office. The Riverside project was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it lay a chain of government contracts for the reconstruction of city facilities. Jessica Reynolds had managed to set up a kickback scheme involving several city departments. State Attorney Frank Donovan frowned as he looked at the photos on the screen. A lavish wedding that never took place had turned into a real nightmare for the city authorities. "So, you're saying she was just a secretary?" He turned to Investigator Morrison. "She was a secretary. Before that, she worked at 3 law firms, never more than a year at any of them. But here she went big. Government contracts, federal programs. And no one checked her background. Michael Carter personally vouched for her to the firm's partners. and they were too busy with big clients to look into the work of a low-level employee. There was a rush of footsteps in the hallway, and a young assistant prosecutor ran into the conference room, waving a folder of documents. "Sir, you have to see this. We checked the funds for the new hospital project, and there's a hole of several $1 million. The money came from the federal budget, and all we have is a foundation and a fence." Donovan rubbed his nose wearily. "What about Carter?" "He's giving a statement in the next office. He swears he knew nothing about his fiancée's schemes, but his signature is on half the documents." The office of Bradley, Thompson, and Partners was deathly quiet. Robert Bradley sat at his desk, staring out the window at the police cars parked at the entrance. He had spent 30 years building the firm's reputation, and now it was all going down the drain because of some con artist. There was a knock at the door, and James Thompson, the second partner, entered. "The mayor's office called," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "They're canceling all current contracts. They don't want their name associated with a scandal." "What about the other clients?" "The insurance company has already terminated the contract. The bank is taking a break until the circumstances are clarified. The rest are keeping quiet for now, but it's only a matter of time." In the reception area, Nancy tried to hold back the onslaught of journalists. The phone rang incessantly. "No comment. No. Mr. Bradley is not giving interviews. An official statement will be released later." She noticed 2 investigators leading another employee out of the office for questioning. Panic was growing. No one knew who would be called next. The city administration was also in turmoil. The mayor had called an emergency meeting to try to understand the scale of the disaster. How did she even get access to information about federal projects? He banged his fist on the table in anger. "Through Rodriguez from the approvals department," replied the head of the legal department. "He has already confessed everything. He says she offered him a deal he couldn't refuse." "What about the hospital construction? That's directly funded by the federal government." "That's why a commission from Washington is on its way here. Embezzling budget money is a whole other level of responsibility." Panic reigned in the corridors of City Hall. Employees hurriedly cleaned their computers and shredded documents. No one wanted to be implicated in a scandal involving the theft of federal funds. By evening, the news was all over the TV channels. Journalists surrounded the prosecutor's office, where Michael Carter was still being questioned. "Mr. Carter, you claim you didn't know about your fiancé's schemes? How do you explain your signatures on the documents? Is it true that the money allocated for the hospital went to your wedding?" Michael walked silently to his car, hiding his face from the cameras. His career was crumbling before his eyes, and with it, his hopes for a future in law. Meanwhile, a special commission was being formed at the federal agency responsible for overseeing the use of public funds. What had started as a wedding scandal was turning into the biggest investigation in recent years. In her prison cell, Jessica sat on a narrow cot, still in her wedding dress. Her lipstick was smeared, her hair was disheveled, but her eyes still burned with the same fire. She knew that all was not lost. She still had her trump card. In the small apartment Michael had rented, there was a flash drive in the safe containing compromising information on half the city administration. All that remained was to play that card right. The courtroom was unusually quiet. Jessica sat next to her court-appointed lawyer, adjusting the strict gray suit that had replaced her luxurious wedding dress. Only a week had passed, but she already looked different. Her former self-confidence had disappeared, and the victorious gleam in her eyes had faded. Federal Prosecutor Sarah Klein laid out documents on the table. Behind her sat representatives of the Financial Crimes Investigation Commission. They had flown in from Washington as soon as the scale of the embezzlement became clear. "Your Honor," Sarah stood up, straightening her jacket, "the prosecution has irrefutable evidence that the defendant created a criminal scheme to embezzle budget funds through shell companies. We have documents confirming her direct involvement in the theft of federal grants." Jessica leaned over to her lawyer. "Tell them about the flash drive." The lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client is willing to cooperate with the investigation. She has information that is of interest to the justice system." Whispers broke out in the courtroom. Sarah Klein frowned. She didn't like it when defendants tried to bargain. An hour later, the prosecutor, the lawyer, and representatives of the commission gathered in the judge's chambers. Jessica sat in the corner with her hands folded on her knees. "So, what do you have?" Sarah looked at her with ill-concealed contempt. "A complete archive of correspondence with city officials, recordings of conversations, money transfer documents, kickback distribution schemes, names, dates, amounts, everything." "And where is this material?" "In a safe place, but I'll only tell you if I get a deal." Sarah smiled. "You do realize you're facing up to 20 years, right? Embezzlement of federal funds is a serious charge." "That's exactly why I want to make a deal." In the court hallway, Michael waited his turn to testify. He looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes. His partners at the firm had suspended him pending an investigation, and his clients refused to do business with him. "Mr. Carter?" A young investigator approached him. "The prosecutor would like to ask you a few questions about the apartment you were renting." Michael paled. He remembered the safe in that apartment. Jessica had insisted on having it installed, saying it was for storing important project documents. On the other side of town, investigators were already breaking into that safe. The flash drive contained exactly what Jessica had said it did, a detailed archive of her criminal activities. But that wasn't all. There was other information as well, compromising material on high-ranking officials that had nothing to do with the case. Jessica had covered all her bases. That evening, the counsel gathered again in the prosecutor's office. Sarah leafed through the printouts, shaking her head. She deliberately collected dirt on everyone she dealt with. Smart. Now she has something to bargain with. "What are we going to do?" "The same as always. Seek a balance between justice and expediency." Jessica waited for news in her holding cell. She knew her trump card would work. Too many respected people would not want their dirty laundry aired in public. The next day, the court announced a recess in the hearings. The official reason was the need to study new case materials. The unofficial reason was negotiations on the terms of a deal. Michael sat in the empty courtroom trying to comprehend what was happening. His career was ruined, his reputation destroyed. And the woman he was going to marry turned out to be a cold-blooded con artist who had spent years gathering dirt on everyone around her. An elderly judge approached him. "You know, son, I've been sitting on this bench for 30 years, and I've often seen smart people do stupid things because of beautiful women. But your case is special. She used you as a cover for her schemes. You were just a stepping stone in her career as a con artist." Michael was silent. What could he say? Meanwhile, in the federal prosecutor's office, a cooperation agreement with the investigation was being drafted. Jessica would receive a significantly shorter sentence in exchange for testifying against high-ranking officials. It wasn't an ideal solution, but justice often requires compromise. Michael sat in the empty apartment that he and Jessica had once rented for their meetings. Boxes of belongings stood against the wall. The apartment had to be vacated by tomorrow. The investigators had already taken all the documents and equipment, leaving only personal items. The empty safe gaped like a black hole in the wall. The very flash drive that was now the subject of negotiations at the prosecutor's office had been kept there. Michael ran his hand over the cold metal. Jessica had convinced him to install the safe, supposedly for important work documents. He had no idea that she was collecting compromising material on everyone around her. On the coffee table lay a stack of wedding invitations. The printer had printed too many. Gold embossing, ornate font, their names joined by a monogram. Now this luxurious paper was only good for kindling. The doorbell rang. It was Steve, his old friend from work. He brought whiskey and 2 glasses. "How are you?" Steve poured the amber liquid. "Like a man who's been taken for a ride." Michael downed his drink in one gulp. "You know what the worst part is? I really loved her. I believed every word she said. She fooled everyone. Even Bradley thought she was a great professional. And I should have noticed. Those strange meetings with clients, the incomprehensible documents, the sudden business trips." The phone vibrated on the windowsill. It was Jessica's lawyer. She wanted to meet. The visiting room at the county jail was cold and uncomfortable. Jessica sat at a plastic table, still wearing the same gray suit, now wrinkled after several days in a cell. "You have to support me," she leaned forward. "If we stick together—" "Together?" Michael smiled bitterly. "You used me as a cover for your schemes. My signature is on the documents for the withdrawal of federal funds. My reputation is ruined. I can help you get out of this. I have information." "No, Jessica. No more information. No deals. I'm filing for divorce." She leaned back in her chair, narrowing her eyes. "You think you can start over? Without me?" "I already have. I admitted to negligence and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. In exchange, I'll get probation." "Traitor," she hissed. Funny coming from a woman who betrayed everyone around her. His lawyer was waiting for him in the hallway with the divorce papers. Michael signed them without reading them. What difference did it make now how they divided their property? All he had left was the hope of someday clearing his name. In the evening, he returned to the apartment to finish packing. On the bedroom floor, he found her hair clip, a small one with a pearl. She had worn it on the day they first met. Michael clenched the hair clip in his fist, then opened his palm and threw it in the trash can. The landline rang in the living room. The real estate agent was reminding him that the lease was up. Michael looked around one last time. They had been happy here, or so he thought. They had made plans for the future here, plans that turned out to be a mirage. It was here that he had kissed the woman who had destroyed his life. Picking up the last box, he left without looking back. In the car was a letter from his partners at the firm. They were offering him to resign voluntarily to avoid a public scandal. Tomorrow, he would sign his resignation and start looking for a job in another city, far away from the memories of the woman in the gray suit who was now bargaining with the prosecutor, trying to trade her freedom for someone else's secrets. A warm autumn day painted the park in golden hues. Lauren walked down the familiar alley where she and Michael used to love to walk on weekends. Now those memories no longer caused her pain, only a slight nostalgia for her past life. Her phone vibrated, a message from Nancy. Her old friend had sent her a link to a news article. Jessica Reynolds had been sentenced to 5 years in prison. The deal with the prosecution had worked. She had turned in all her accomplices in exchange for a minimal sentence. At the entrance to the cafe, Lauren ran into Robert Bradley. Michael's former boss had aged noticeably over the past year. The scandal with his company had cost him not only money, but also his health. "Lauren, good to see you," he smiled warmly. "How's your new job?" "Great. I started my own consulting firm. It turns out a lot of my clients followed me." "Not surprising. You were always the best financial analyst in town." They exchanged a few more pleasantries about the weather and mutual acquaintances. Bradley delicately avoided mentioning Michael. Everyone knew that their former partner was now working in a small town on the West Coast, trying to start his life over. At the cafe, Lauren ordered her favorite cappuccino. At the next table, a young couple was discussing their upcoming wedding. The girl was showing photos of wedding dresses on her phone. Lauren couldn't help but remember another dress, a snow-white one embroidered with crystals, which Jessica had planned to wear at her wedding. The waitress brought her coffee and a newspaper. On the third page was a small article about the construction of a new hospital in the city. It would now be under strict federal supervision. That evening, Lauren sorted through old photographs at home. She was planning to move. This house held too many memories. The real estate agent had already found buyers, and the deal was scheduled to close in a month. In a box of old documents, she found their wedding photo. Lauren was wearing a simple, elegant dress, and Michael looked happy in a dark tuxedo. She hesitated for a second, then decisively tore up the photo and threw it in the trash. The past should remain in the past. The work phone rang on the table. A new client wanted to discuss an investment project. Lauren turned on her laptop and immersed herself in her work as usual. Life went on, without drama or betrayal, just the ordinary, everyday life of a successful woman who had finally learned to live for herself. A familiar name flashed across the news. One of the city officials involved in Jessica's schemes had been sentenced to prison. Lauren closed the browser tab. That story no longer concerned her. Her cat purred on the windowsill, the only living creature that had shared her home for the past year. She scratched him behind the ear, looking at the sunset sky. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new encounters and new opportunities, and no regrets about the past. Before going to bed, Lauren made a plan for the following week: meetings with clients, viewing a new office, dinner with friends. The ordinary life of an ordinary woman who once found the strength to turn the page and start all over again. On the bedside table was a photograph of Lauren in front of her new company's building. A smart, confident woman who knows what she wants from life. The woman she had always been, but had forgotten for a while. As she fell asleep, she thought about tomorrow's meeting with investors. No thoughts of the past, no memories of betrayal. Only the future, bright and full of possibilities. On the other side of the country, Michael sat in his small office trying to build a new career. And somewhere in a women's prison, Jessica was planning how she would live after her release. But those are completely different stories.